Good evening. I'm Larry Lino, pastor here at Trinity, and it's an honor to have you join us for our fourth community conversation. This evening, we're learning about Nancy Toscano, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Jill Gaynor, the Annual Giving Officer at United Methodist Family Services. For the audience, this will be a conversation with Nancy and Jill, but for the last 15 minutes of our hour, we'll be taking your questions. So those of you who are watching at home, please submit your questions in the chat box as part of this broadcast. And if you're here in the sanctuary, we ask that you one at a time approach the mic stand in the center of the sanctuary to ask your questions. So Nancy and Jill, we thank you for joining us this evening. Let's go ahead and get started. So what we'd like to ask you first is to tell us about yourselves. Where are you from? Tell us about your education and how you found your way to Richmond and UMFS.
Should I start? So nice to meet you. My name is Nancy, and I would say that it was a bit of a circuitous route to get to Richmond and to UMFS. So I always start by really sharing a little bit of a context of when I was 8 years old.
Okay.
I had two goals, and I was passionate about these two goals. I used to write about them, read about them, dream about them. They never happened, to skip to the end, but they shaped how I landed here. So I always start with that story. I wanted to be the first female to be in the NBA, to play in the NBA. So that was gonna happen. They had the WNBA, but it wasn't very cool in the late 70s, early 80s like it is now, but I wanted to be in the NBA. And the second one was I was gonna go in the Peace Corps. 8 years old, those were my two goals, and they were gonna happen. So fast forward to high school, and I am one of 11 children, and actually 13 if you include two cousins who grew up as siblings with me. And I didn't have anybody who went to college in my life. So my mom got her GED when she was in her 40s, and my dad did go to school later on to community college. So that was my model, that's all I really knew. And I learned that you had to graduate from college in order to go to the Peace Corps. So I was like, okay, I've got to do this somehow or another. And fortunately, basketball came into play because I earned a full scholarship for basketball to go to college. So went to college, found my way to my people in social work. So that was absolutely my love. I felt very at home. And when I graduated, Peace Corps. And I chickened out. I had never been on a plane. It just got too scary. But someone told me about something called the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. And the Jesuit Volunteer Corps is like an AmeriCorps in the country. You're doing service. You could go to Guam as well for 2 years or be in the country for one. And I didn't have enough money for the Guam, so I picked California. So I went to California. I served in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. I worked with homeless families. It was very experiential. I lived for a period of time on a river with homeless families. We stayed at homeless shelters to have that experience of walking amongst people we serve. Absolutely a fish in water, loved every second of it, and found my path with social work. Graduated from NYU with my MSW, and then I was going to go to the Peace Corps. Met my husband, and he was like, I don't want to go to the Peace Corps. So he's like, Nancy, you haven't really been anywhere, so can we try maybe going somewhere a little more familiar? He had been consulting in England. We went to England for a couple of years. I worked for a college for people with Asperger's syndrome. I was a therapist there, and 2.5 years in, I said, John, okay, this is great, but I want to go to the Peace Corps. So we applied to the Peace Corps together, and in the process, God intervened and said, and we met a woman by the name of Zazmani Shafi, and she's a psychiatrist in Malaysia. And she learned what we were doing. She learned that we had experience in autism and said, would you come to Kuala Lumpur and start a school for kids with autism? And we said yes. And it was like as simple as that, and we went. So we started the school, it's still in existence in Kuala Lumpur, and we you know, during that experience, long story short, we needed to exit quickly. And we didn't really have a plan, but we kind of looked for a job, and we found Richmond, a job for my husband in Richmond first, and sort of landed here and said, this looks nice, let's stay here. And I found a job soon after. And how I got to UMFS is that I was in my job at St. Joseph's Villa as a social worker and then a head of school. And I went to a training at UMFS. It was a 5-day training, and you're getting the flavor of kind of how I operate. But I was like 3 days into a 5-day training, and I fell hard in love. I was like, I don't care what I do, I'm gonna work here, I'm going to work here. And I kind of just showed up to the HR, and they passed me over by 2 jobs. And then I persisted, and they hired me as the director. That was 15 years ago. I guess year 2, I said to the HR director, someday I want to be a CEO. Kind of bold thing to say, but she didn't scoff at me. She didn't laugh at me. She said, I think you should talk to Greg Peters, the CEO. And it's one thing to kind of say that, but then to say it to the actual CEO was a little like more daunting. But I did. I said, someday, not soon, but someday I want to be a CEO. And he did the biggest gift that a person could give, and I tried to pay it forward, is that he didn't laugh either. He said, I want you to do that, but there's a lot of work you need to do to get there. And you know, a doctorate later and some other experiences later, I became the CEO in April. So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
But to be clear, NBA is out of the picture?
NBA, well, I don't know, maybe. Maybe.
Oh, that is great. Yeah. Okay. Hey, Jill, tell us about you.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in New Jersey. Please do not hold that against me. To parents who came from the Midwest. On my mom's side, we were Methodist going back multiple generations, and so I was raised United Methodist. Born and raised in the church. As I was headed towards college, a lot of kids in New Jersey end up looking elsewhere because there aren't too many state schools in New Jersey. And I landed at William & Mary, which was an awesome choice. I graduated with a bachelor's in economics and Spanish and headed up to Northern Virginia to work for the federal government for a couple years. And then I went down to North Carolina to get my MBA at UNC Chapel Hill. And that is where I began my 23-year career in corporate marketing, which I really loved. It took me to Memphis, Tennessee, and Chicago, and then ultimately a friend here in Richmond recommended a job at Hamilton Beach Brands, the small appliance manufacturer. And so I moved to Richmond in 1999 for that job, and I worked for Hamilton Beach for 17 years. And when I moved to Richmond, a friend of mine was an associate pastor at Reveille. So that was the church that I joined, Reveille United Methodist down on Carey Street. And it was through Reveille that I learned about UMFS. So a small group was going over to UMFS to volunteer with kids in the cottages. And we went over and we started to, just get to know the kids a little better. We were making cookies and playing games and just having fun. And I fell in love. I loved the kids there. And slowly over time, I started to understand better what some of them had been through. And I have to be honest, it broke my heart. So my husband and I started volunteering directly in a number of different capacities, and I felt God calling me to do something different with my career. As my 50th birthday was approaching, I thought to myself, if I'm ever going to make a shift into something that is more meaningful to me personally like that, not that my corporate career was not meaningful, but it was really time to make that shift, and I thought, if I get to this now, I'll still have a good number of years to really give back in this career. And so I started to pursue it, and the first call I made was to Greg Peters. Greg had been a member at Reveille, and so I called him and said, Greg, what could this look like? And that began a little journey where we explored, like, what could that look like for me? And I explored some other options too, but this is where my heart was. And when the job opened up in the development department, I took it, and I'm really happy. That was 5 years ago, and I literally never once have said, I wish I was still in the corporate sector. Wow. It was by far the best decision I ever made. This is where my heart is.
That is fantastic. Wonderful stories. Now, y'all, a lot of our Trinity family is very familiar with UMFS, but maybe not everyone. So I know you can talk about this all night, but give us a snapshot of what UMFS does and the services that y'all provide.
So we are a 21-year-old nonprofit, and we serve at-risk youth. And really, we're looking to either build a family, find a family, heal a child so that they can be with a family, but it's always with the notion that we will only serve children within the family. And so our services are things like treatment foster care. We're the largest treatment foster care provider in the state. We have residential treatment. So for 121 years, we've had children live on the site, but it's changed over years. And now it's for kids with very complex mental health problems and trauma. And they live here. We have a crisis center up in Northern Virginia. We have schools for kids who aren't succeeding in the public schools, both in Richmond and also in Shenandoah Valley. And we have 16 other services that are related to children and families.
Wow, that's impressive. Now, I know there's been a lot of activity going on the campus of UMFS. Tell us about that and what impact has that been having?
Take that. So, yes, it's pretty incredible. Actually, week by week, I just love kind of seeing the progress, but we're going through a campus transformation. We're due for it because the cottages that the kids live in hadn't been really renovated or up to date in about 60 or 70 years. And the needs of the kids have changed pretty dramatically also through that time. So I would say about 7 or 8 years ago, we were sitting around the table deciding whether do we want to stay in residential treatment services. And the answer was a resounding yes, but we wanted to be all in. And all in meant it had to be the best, the state-of-the-art, the most trauma-informed, the most thoughtful kind of experience, because it is very traumatic for a child to be away from their home when they're going through so much. So we wanted to make sure that we had the best of the best. And we found ways to finance it. We asked the community to help us, and they did. And we just actually opened the doors to our kids about a month ago, or at least one of the wings. And pretty soon, the building is complete at this point. So now we're going into the second phase of our campus transformation, and that's the addition of our charter house school. So currently, we have a school on campus that is lovely, but it's not big enough. So kids are in different cottages around the campus, if you can kind of picture that. And this is going to enable us to have it all in, two side-by-side buildings.
I think one of the loveliest things too I've heard you say many times is the facility that we're building right now is state of the art, and I know Nancy, you and other leaders have toured multiple facilities in Virginia and many other states, and the thing that just really resonates with me is that we have built a state of the art facility with wonderful provisions for the kids that we're serving, and the kids that we're serving are the lowest income kids. These are kids who are not able to afford services elsewhere. And while other providers are focusing more on the best ways they can make profits, some of them, and taking out-of-state clients, we're focusing on Virginia's poorest children and helping them get these services that they desperately need. And that just touches my heart.
Love that. Yes, it is the best. Come toward if you ever want to see it. It is absolutely beautiful, and you're right. I'm proud that we have stayed true to our mission and serving those kids who might not have a lot.
Fantastic. So before we started broadcasting, we were talking about church life and how we here and at Reveille have been, coping with the pandemic. I have to ask you, what has that meant for y'all at UMFS, and how have you adapted and continued to function in the world of COVID?
We keep using the term the COVID perks or the COVID learnings, because we're trying to frame it positively. But it has been a ride, I will tell you, I guess like everyone else. And, you know, because you have kids who are living, you know, in close proximity and staff who are stressed out, and there was a lot of unknowns early on. We do feel like that feels like a distant memory, thank goodness, when it was just felt like minute to minute, just trying to, you know, make it all work. It doesn't feel like that anymore. And there is much more of a reflection on what were we supposed to learn. And I hear people being able to be in that space more. And I'm grateful for it, and I learned the resilience of our kids, of our staff, of our families, of our foster families, who just continued to step up even through all that uncertainty. So I'm a pretty optimistic, glasses half full kind of person anyway, but so I choose mostly to look at what gifts we got as a result, even though it has been very difficult. So I don't know.
Yeah, I want to say too, like, I've just been so inspired by my coworkers. I mean, part of my job in development is writing grants for foundations around the state to partner with us, and that gives me the opportunity that some of my other coworkers don't have to truly work with folks from around the agency, because sometimes you're like in your program making sure you can really get done what needs to be done there. I have a little bit more luxury to see lots of different people at work, and I've just been so inspired by the response that they've had, because I mean, it was tough for all of our educators to convert to online classes like that. It's even tougher when you're running a school where kids with behavioral challenges, emotional challenges, they really need that in-person component. And for those guys to really, you know, dig in and figure out how to make that the best it could be given the constraints that we had was just so inspiring. But I also have to say, I think the community response has been so inspiring too. As our volunteer team, for example, was looking at how to shift all the folks who were coming on our campus, we had to unfortunately say we can't have you right now because we're trying to keep everybody as safe as possible. We locked things down in the beginning of the pandemic. And our volunteer team pivoted and really came up with a creative new role called the Family Champion, where people could sign up for an email list and learn about needs in their local community and respond to them. We've had multiple stories of emergency, I think an elevated number of emergency placements in foster care during the pandemic. The one that really just tore me apart was two little sibling girls who were literally found on the street naked by construction workers. And I mean, we say sometimes kids come to us with only the clothes on their back. These kids didn't even have that. And our volunteer team put out a list of about $1,500 worth of things that these kids needed and that their foster family needed in order to prepare the home for them. And the Family Champions bought that list completely in 90 minutes. And it's just been so touching to see the way that people have reached out to support and the way that folks have been able to pivot and make sure that they're able to get these needs in front of people and make sure that everybody has, you know, just the basic belongings that they need in order to get started and to thrive. So it's just been lovely to see all of that throughout the agency.
That's fantastic. You know, we hear so much about schools and educational institutions and nonprofits struggling, you know, in the pandemic to hang on to staff and to be fully staffed. How have y'all done with that?
So I would say we have had some struggles with filling positions, and some of it is because our public partners are also stretched. So for instance, when we hire somebody, it might be 9 weeks or 12 weeks before they start because the background check takes that long. It used to be like 10 days, but now it's 9 weeks. So I would say that has been somewhat of a struggle. But the vast majority of our staff have like hung in there with us, but not just hung in there with us, they're going above and beyond. And we joke about other duties as assigned is like 50% of your job because you might be serving food one day and then you're running a financial report the next, and everybody's just kind of pitching in. And because in many ways it's the work has become harder because the foster families need more, the kids need more, and we have the same amount or sometimes less staff. And the staff are stressed too. So they have their own, kids come doing virtual education or whatever, childcare issues, and so they're making it work. But I agree with Jill. The most inspiring thing is just seeing how people are coming together, making it work, checking on each other, doing the other duties as assigned as much as is needed. And then our volunteers, they had to pivot, as Jill said, they had to pivot in the way they gave, but they gave in the way we needed it, and that was amazing.
Fantastic. Okay, another completely unfair question, and I know, no two are going to be alike, but just give us an idea what a day looks like for each of you. What kind of things do you find falling into your lap, or things that you take on?
I really love the variety of my job. I mentioned before, I write grants for foundations. So one day I might be working on that, looking for who's the best foundation to meet a need that one of our programs have. The next moment I might be taking a call from a donor, trying to learn about a specific interest that they have and seeing if that might be a good match for us. I get to use my former corporate marketing skills a lot as well to help with email communications and work with our marketing team on social media and things like that. It's just a variety of different things. Working with our volunteers, I might get a call from a church who's really interested in partnering with us in some way, and I might reach out to our volunteer team to see if there's a good match there. So it's just lots of different fun things, and no 2 days are exactly the same, and I love that.
I would say I got into this work because I wanted to help vulnerable children and families, and now that I'm the CEO, I don't see kids and families quite as much, but I make it a point to do it as often as I can. So today, day in the life, I listened to a young lady in our residential hall play the ukulele that she had learned and sing a song, and that kind of filled my cup as I went into the board meeting and working with the board, and met with some community partners who wanted to partner on a Christmas giveaway type thing. I'm meeting with my executive team to kind of strategy about the financial side, the governance side, the board side, and then the program side, which will still always be my love. So I agree with Jill in that no day is the same as the next, and it is varied. The thing I'm very conscious of, making sure that I do, is see our kids, or I'll ask staff, hey, tell me some good news, tell me a story, just so that I'm always staying connected to our mission. So, yeah.
Talk to me about the future. Exciting things are happening with, the new school, with the new residence halls. But as you look 5 or 10 years into the future, what are your hopes and dreams for UMFS?
So I feel like we're starting to feel it, but the vision we talk about is that we're not just providing an amazing service. I think we do that. But we're also being like a model for others so that they know how to replicate it. So the example the residence is one example. I'm like, I want as many people who are trying to do this to come, steal our ideas, give us the blueprints, whatever they need, so that they can mimic what we've done, learn from our mistakes. So anytime somebody wants to come to do something that we do, I want to share it. The good, the bad, and the ugly, so that they can do it even better. But it's helping the field. But I will say an example of a service that we're about to take on is to serve unaccompanied minors and help reunite them with family in the States and provide aftercare services for them. And as we were going through the grant process, it's a federal grant, I saw an opportunity to push the envelope a little bit and suggest that they should add in their model a peer support model. We do this in other services where people who have lived experience are hired paid full-time staff. And either maybe they're a parent who had a child with mental illness and they're helping another parent, or maybe they're youth who've been in foster care who now can offer their lived experience as a professional. So we saw an opportunity. We pushed for it. I didn't know whether it would work to have a peer support model in this new model where we helped unaccompanied minors or immigrant children. Sometimes people don't know what I'm talking about, but and it worked. And that created a ripple effect because then the folks that we were partnering with said, well, why don't we do this? The federal government will pay for this. And we said, yes, and we have a model that we do this at UMFS somewhere else. So my vision is to have exceptional services, to stay very close to our mission, to do the best that we can, and as Jill said, that we're not, I know money is our oxygen to live out our mission, but it's never going to be the driving force. The driving force will always be our mission, and then we share it as widely as we can so that it helps the field get better for kids and families. So, yeah.
No, yeah, one thing I wanted to add to, just from looking at it from my development lens, which is a little bit more narrow than Nancy's bigger lens, which is awesome. One of my passions as I go out into the community and meet with wonderful folks like you is to try to really preach the social gospel and the social justice aspect of what we do. I know I myself, I grew up in I'll call it a classic middle-class loving family. I was fortunate my parents both went to college. When it was time for me to go to college, there was never any question that I was going to college. They had all the supports in place. After I graduated, we joked about having the First National Bank of Dad whenever there was an issue. You know, we had an easy path in life, and I think I've been a mentor to a young lady in foster care who came out of the foster care system for the last 8 years, and I'm happy, I just have to put a little plug in, I'm happy to say she'll be graduating with her Master's of Social Work in June. I'm so excited, May, so excited about that. But working with her and really seeing the world through her eyes and talking to a lot of the other kids that we serve, you realize very quickly that what some of us were very fortunate to grow up with is nothing like what our kids have. They have none of those advantages. I've heard people before say to me in churches, why don't those people just get a job? And I don't think they realize all of the benefits they had to get a job, their college placement office, their parents' connections, the friends and family they have in the community. When you're a kid coming out of the foster care system, you have absolutely none of those. And understanding what it's like to be them, especially if they are a person of color to boot, has been just really eye-opening for me, and I like to share that with others because I want them to have more empathy and more understanding, and to just grow their heart a little bit for these kids as mine has grown, and to want to be Jesus for them and to give back for them. And there are many other worthy populations too, but I'm of course going to advocate for mine. But I just really want to preach that and to make sure that more people's ears are open and hearts are open to that.
Yeah, there's something about in our culture wanting to empower and elevate our clients that they are the teachers. And we hire folks, we have them on board. We have a Delegate Reed actually grew up. He's one of our board members. He's a delegate up in Loudoun County, and he actually grew up at UMFS. We're about to have another young man who grew up in our foster care system, and actually we employed him, and now he will be a board member. So it's not just about serving, you know, we're the professional and they're the client. There's so much that you can learn, but they need to have those opportunities. And yeah, I would say the vision is that we are the best. We provide the best outcomes. When I say the best, it's not in a braggy way. I mean, like, we provide the best service so that these kids can grow up when they're 35 and have what they need. And then that's generational help if you're doing that right. And then the second part of that equation is sharing it as widely as we can, helping other partners, whatever we need to do to make sure the field is doing right by these kids.
Okay, I've got a couple of tough questions for y'all now, because you're experts in your field, but in your work with kids and families and in different communities throughout the Commonwealth, what's your greatest concern?
Yeah, the greatest concern actually relates to what we were just talking about, is the lack of empathy that I see. And I know like that's a strange lens to look at, because you might be meaning about the children, but I would say that the onus is on us as a community who are healthy to help elevate these kids who have not had a fair shot in life, no fault of their own. And when you truly feel that empathy and you understand, then you're going to do nothing but help. But a lot of, we've seen, we know our kids, our staff experience racism and homophobia, like all sorts of things that are societal, that is the opposite of empathy. We also know that people, maybe, I don't even want to blame, but don't understand what trauma does to the brain and how that impacts people, their actions, and how behaviors are just a representation of what they're feeling and how to communicate, but they don't have the words to say it. And so then you get the quick remarks like they need to be punished or something like that, and it's too hard to have a quick response to be able to explain what we've learned in this field, and know with like certainty about what these kids need, which is unconditional love and empathy and forgiveness and acceptance, and like emotionally corrective experiences with adults, and so I could say there's a lot of concerns for the kids and for the families, but my heart gets heavy when I think and hear things that are hateful and lack empathy.
Yeah, I've seen, I remember years ago I saw an interview that Oprah did where she was talking about trauma, and she or the person she was interviewing, I can't remember which, said that we need to shift our conversations from what's wrong with you, because our immediate response when we see somebody do something, that seems off to us is, what's wrong with you? And we say it in a very judgmental way, and even if people don't say it with their mouth, you can often see it in their body language and their facial expressions, absolutely. So shifting that from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. What happened to you that might cause that response? And one of the ways one of our staff members described it once was we need to be curious, not furious. We need to be curious, not furious. And he was sharing that in context of, in one of our cottages, one of the youth once was at that tipping point, the trauma, trigger, lizard brain, our therapists call it sometimes, just, triggered on, and the child just like hurled milk across the kitchen, because they just, they'd elevated, they'd escalated, and that was what their response had to be in that moment. And that particular gentleman, he said, I didn't care that he threw the milk across the kitchen. I really wanted to know why. I wanted to be curious. Why did he throw that milk across the kitchen? What triggered him? What were the issues underlying that he was working through emotionally that needed to be addressed? But it was funny, I shared that with a church group once, and the preacher was like, oh my gosh, we need to be that way every day. And I was like, yeah, absolutely we do. I think if we were all curious instead of furious when the grocery line is taking too long, or when somebody cut us off in traffic or things like that, how much better would we be as a world, and how much more open and loving would we be to people who are different than us that we don't necessarily understand? And I think I agree with Nancy wholeheartedly. It's such a huge issue for us in our culture.
Wow. I was struck when you said that when y'all work with children, you work within the family. What can the community do to help build sustainable stabilities in families.
So I share this story sometimes at work when I think a lot of our workers come in because they want to work with kids. And sometimes when they're starting off in their career, they get caught in the trap of thinking, bad family, they did something bad to the kid, we need to protect them from the family. And it's understandable, right? We think that. But the reality is our kids want to be with their family or a family.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they don't end up with their biological family, we basically say it's never an idea to dismiss or demonize their family because that's their family. So the first step for us is really going back to the simple, like empathy, lack of judgment. And I always share the story. I'm one of 11, really 13 in my family. My parents, incredibly loving. And we had CPS involvement in our family because a neighbor did, Child Protective Services, thank you, in our family at certain points because people thought we weren't being cared for in the way that we should. And that was a very shameful thing that my parents carried around for a really long time. We finally talked about it. But I say that because as a kid, oh my God, I loved my family. Like they made a lot of mistakes, right? But I loved my family. And they didn't need judgment or shame. They needed help. Mm-hmm. They needed support. And I think the idea of if you really want to do right by the child, then you have to do family work. And if it's not possible within the biological family, then it's with the foster parent, it's with the adoptive family, it's with the grandparents, but never alone because of, as Jill said, I have an 18-year-old, guaranteed he's going to go off to college and he's going to go flat tire, and who's he going to call? He's going to call me or John. I know it. Something like he's going to not have enough money. He's going to call one of us, right? We're not done at 18, but in foster care, we're saying they're done. Well, that's no way, right? So we have to always be thinking about how to help the family understand that they were kids at one point too. Mm-hmm. They were, if they were acting in unhealthy ways as adults, then they were probably unhealthy or experienced trauma as children, and we need to have the same kind of love and empathy for them. And if you can do that, then everyone is better off, right? The family, the child. So a lot of our work is around healing the family.
Yeah, I learned a little bit of that on when I first started with the agency, and I went out to meet a family down in our South Hill office. I went out to meet a young man in foster care in our South Hill office, and I heard the backstory from the social worker before I went to meet with him. And I learned how he had been sexually abused as a young child, and he thought that's what love and family look like, and that's what happened when he went into a foster family. That pattern was repeated, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like what an awful family that must have been. And the more I learned and the more I talked to people, the more I realized those parents learned that from their family and their family. And so you can go back multiple generations, and people learn things in their family of origin that they may not realize are, things that need to be addressed and worked through together as a family in order to break that pattern. But you have to partner alongside that family to help break that pattern, or it's going to keep getting passed down from generation to generation. And I think that's one of the beautiful things in our Child and Family Healing Center, our residential program, and several of our other programs. We work intentionally with the family, too, to make sure that everybody is getting that healing and everybody is learning those lessons together, because you do better when you know better. Yeah. And some of us were lucky enough to learn that, and some of us were not. And how do we share that wisdom and love and nurturing that a lot of people didn't get, so that they can pass that down and they can break those cycles? Because it's possible, but they need help.
And don't get me wrong, it's hard, right? When you hear some of these stories, you can get angry, you can feel protective, you can want to write off whatever the family did or whatever happened. But you have two choices. Like, you either go towards love and empathy and healing, or you can go towards judgment and anger and maybe even hate. And so, you know, it's hard, particularly for our younger social workers, when you're first starting out. But then when you start to see the success and what impact that has on both the child and the family and everyone else, then you're hooked. Then you're like, okay, this is the work. This is the work, even if it's hard.
You guys are amazing. Tell us right now, what is the greatest joy and what is the greatest frustration of your work?
I mean, for me, the greatest joy is to see those success stories. I mean, we have during the pandemic, some of these things have not been able to happen. But normally we have a commencement once a quarter when the kids in our residential program graduate from the program, and it is impossible to sit through any of those and not have some tears. I mean, the stories that these kids share, the stories that their families share, that they have learned along the way as well, are just wow. And we get to be the front row to those stories, and it is such an incredible gift. It is such an incredible gift, and that is by far my greatest joy. The greatest frustration is that more people aren't there to help. And there's a lot of loving, wonderful people who are supporting us as donors, as foster parents, as volunteers, as people who are working here, community partners, so many people. But I want everybody to have love for these kids too. I want everybody to have that empathy and that open heart for these kids too. And some of the comments I hear sometimes are really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I would agree. I was thinking about commencement too, but when you hear the stories, the success stories, a lot of our families are amazing. They're like you and I, and something has gone awry for their child, and they feel like they got their child back. And that's amazing to see. I personally love my time when I get to hang with a kid and they play the ukulele for me, or they want to show me some skill they did, or I find it funny and I enjoy seeing this. It's going to probably sound strange to you all, but on our campus we have a lot of beautiful trees. And I'll drive in, and sometimes I'll see a staff talking at the trees. And it makes me smile every time, because it's some kid who climbed up a tree and is trying to get space and whatever. And the thing I love about UMFS, and I know it's so healing, is that we do let kids be kids. We don't have a punitive approach because it doesn't work. But it also allows a kid to climb up a tree, and the staff will just wait it out and talk it through and, you know, process and come down, and then, you know, I'll come in and talk to the trees as well for those times. And yeah, when you see adoption ceremonies, when you see commencements, when you see children who grew up in our care become staff, like, the success stories just get you hooked. Yeah, for sure. My frustration, sometimes I get frustrated at the system. Like, I want the system to work better for our kids and our families, for it to be easier to get the help they need, to get the funding we need. So those kind of things frustrate me. It's very rarely the kids or even the families.
I have one last question for you, but audience, now is the time. Those of you who are watching live stream, if you would like to ask questions of Ann or Jill, go ahead and put those in the chat feature now, or anyone in the sanctuary. If you would like to ask a question, make your way to the microphone. But I'm going to address this question to you, Jill. Other than financial support. And Trinity, our Advent offering, supports UMFS. Give generously and give now. But other than financial support, what can we in communities of faith do to support UMFS? What do you need?
Thank you. I love that question.
Yeah, thought you might.
And thank you very much for the plug for the offering. I really have to say, by the way, You guys are just the most amazing partner. I mean, every year when the check for the offering comes in, we all just celebrate and, yes, do a happy dance. And honestly, I say a prayer of thanks. Because it's just, your generosity, it's overwhelming, and we're so appreciative. But from other ways to support, I mentioned our family champion volunteers earlier. We are starting to open up limited volunteers in person right now, and we always need volunteers. So we are always happy to have volunteer support. So you can go to our website, which is umfs.org/volunteer, to learn more about volunteer opportunities. Within the congregation, if you're a small group or your UMW circle, with Sunday school, what have you, is interested in doing some support for UMFS, we are happy to partner with you on that. So please feel free to reach out to me directly about that. You can find my email on the website in the donate section. So if you go to umfs.org/donate, about halfway down the page, you'll see my email, which is jgaynor@umfs.org. We also are always looking for foster parents. So if that might be something that's touching you, and I'll say some people are like, well, I might be too old, but actually our average foster parent is an empty nester. They're older. But we are happy to have younger people too. But honestly, if that's something that you might want to explore, again, you can learn more on the website at umfs.org/foster. We always covet your prayers, so please keep us in your prayers. Please keep our kids in your prayers as well. And we always appreciate folks advocating for our kids. Like I said before, social justice and preaching the gospel are really important to me. So, the next time you hear somebody say, well, why was that person acting out? And you could say, it might be nice to be curious instead of furious, and think about where that person might be coming from and how we can support them. So advocating for our kids and just kind of internalizing some of those lessons is always appreciated too.
All right. Do we have any questions in the sanctuary? The question was, how many students are in residence right now?
Currently, the kids who live there, in residence, are 40. In the new facility, we'll have 50 at any time. And then, of course, we have about 100 day school kids.
Yeah, I do want to elaborate on that a little bit, too. So those are the kids that are on campus here in Richmond. As Nancy mentioned earlier, we serve kids across the Commonwealth. I think you mentioned that as well, Larry. Thank you. So we have 9 locations, and across all of our programs throughout all of the year, we serve about 1,800 kids a year. So it's a pretty big population. But here just on the Richmond campus, in those 2 programs, as Nancy mentioned, it would be about 40 kids living there, and then another 100 day students coming to the school.
Let me, for the benefit of those listening live stream, the question was, how many locations throughout the Commonwealth does UMFS have, and how many employees?
We have 400 employees, 8 different offices around the state, and about 18 different programs.
Impressive.
It's about...
I'm sorry. The question was, what is the average stay for someone in residence?
So it can vary. So we can have kids who come for a few months and some that stay 2 years, but it's about a year. And we do work after that once they're in the home. So, yeah.
Okay. Aaron, do we have any online questions? All right. Any other questions? Well, Ann, Jill, this has been fantastic. I think we have learned so much. We thank you and so appreciate the ministry that y'all are doing at UMFS. And to our viewers, we appreciate you being with us tonight. Please come back on Tuesday, January the 18th, when our guests from Henrico County will be John Vitolkas, the county manager, and Eric English, the chief of police. And in closing, I'd like to say a word of thanks to our Trinity staff for helping coordinate this event, especially our modern worship leader, Aaron Miller, for providing technical support, and our communications specialist, Kim Johnson. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night and be safe. Well done, y'all.